God is nearer to you than your jugular vein. Why do you still feel distant from him? This is one of the oldest and most perplexing paradoxes of spiritual life. Nearly every tradition speaks of divine nearness, yet human experience seems defined by absence, longing, and separation. We pray to approach what the Quran says is already nearer than our own breath. Ibn Arabi, the great Andalusian mystic and philosopher, reframed this contradiction. He argued that divine nearness is not a matter of space or time. It cannot be approached or measured because it is the very ground of being, the condition that makes existence possible in the first place. The problem lies in perception. The human mind thinks in spatial and temporal terms, here and there, before and after. This structure creates a false duality, creator versus creation, subject versus object. Ibn Arabi's metaphysics dissolves that division entirely. Nearness is not something that approaches you, it is the reality you already inhabit. To understand why this nearness often feels distant, we must examine how perception, ego, and awareness distort our experience of the real. Modern humanity faces an unprecedented crisis of perceived disconnection. Despite access to spiritual texts, meditation, and global networks, surveys consistently show record levels of existential isolation. A recent Pew study found that over 60% of adults in developed nations describe themselves as spiritually distant. The paradox deepens. Technological proximity increases, while inner connection deteriorates. From a psychological perspective, this is rooted in the brain's default mode network, a neural system that generates the sense of I, me, and mine. It narrates the story of self and constantly distinguishes between observer and observed. While evolutionarily useful for survival, it also creates an illusion of separation. The mind perceives two, self and world, worshipper and God, where there is only one field of awareness. Perceptual bias theory further explains that humans are wired to categorize reality through binary distinctions. Inside and outside, near and far, subject and object. These mental shortcuts make the infinite appear distant simply because infinity does not fit into the categories of finite cognition. Thus, when we say God feels far, it is not a statement about divine absence, but about perceptual limitation. The infinite filtered through the finite inevitably seems remote. Ibn Arabi's philosophy directly dismantles this illusion, showing that what we call distance is merely a veil projected by the mind. Ibn Arabi, often called al-Shaykh al-Akbar, the greatest master, lived in 12th century Andalusia. His monumental works, Futuhat al-Makkiyah, the Meccan openings, and Fusus al-Hikam, the bezels of wisdom, developed one of history's most sophisticated metaphysical systems. At its core lies the unity of being. According to this view, there is only one true existence, God's own being, endlessly manifesting through the forms of creation. Everything we perceive, the world, the self, the cosmos, is not separate from the divine, but an expression of his ongoing self-disclosure. Ibn Arabi wrote, "The universe is the mirror in which the divine contemplates himself." In this framework, nearness does not describe a movement toward God, but the unveiling of what has always been inseparably one. To understand this vision, Ibn Arabi breaks down perception itself, explaining why our experience of nearness and distance fluctuates even though the underlying reality never changes. Human beings instinctively imagine nearness in physical terms. Something is close if it occupies the same space. But God, Ibn Arabi explains, is not an object in space. He is the condition for space itself. The Quran calls him both al-Jia, the manifest, and al-Batin, the hidden, outwardly evident in every form, yet inwardly beyond all form. Therefore, to ask where God is to misunderstand the question. There is no where outside the divine reality. God is not in the world or beyond it. He is the where of all awareness. Modern physics offers an instructive parallel. In quantum field theory, matter is not composed of discrete particles, but of excitations in a unified field. The apparent multiplicity of objects is a surface phenomenon of a single underlying continuum. Similarly, Ibn Arabi's metaphysics describes existence as oscillations within the infinite field of divine being. The insight, nearness, cannot be measured because both the measurer and the measured exist within the same reality. Ibn Arabi often likens the world to a mirror through which the divine sees himself. Consciousness, the reflective capacity of the human being, is the polished surface of that mirror. When the mirror is clean, it reflects divine light directly. When clouded by ego or ignorance, the reflection distorts, giving rise to the sense of separation. In modern cognitive science, perception is understood not as a passive reception, but as an active construction. Some call this the observer illusion. The self that seems to stand apart from experience is itself a mental construct, produced by overlapping neural processes. There is no central eye witnessing reality from outside. Perception is reality unfolding within awareness. Ibn Arabi's insight anticipates this by centuries. When consciousness mistakes the reflected image, the self, for the source, the real, it experiences disconnection. Remove the distortion, and what remains is pure reflection. The divine seeing through the human distance exists only between two finite entities. When one of those entities is infinite, the concept collapses. The Quran states plainly, we are nearer to him than his jugular vein. Ibn Arabi interprets this not as metaphor but as ontology. Divine nearness is not a feeling but the structure of being itself. Neuroscientific research supports this insight metaphorically. The brain does not perceive space in absolute terms, but during deep meditation or awe states, activity in the parietal lobes, which defines spatial boundaries, decreases. Participants report the dissolution of self-other boundaries and the sense of unity with all existence. From a scientific lens, the perception of distance literally disappears when the brain's mapping of separation relaxes. Thus, when spiritual traditions speak of closeness to God, they are describing not movement, but the collapse of mental distance, the realignment of perception with reality. For Ibn Arabi, divine nearness is not static, but continuously renewed. Creation itself is an ongoing act of self-disclosure, the breath of the All-Merciful that sustains being in every moment. Existence is recreated instant by instant, and with each renewal, the divine reveals a new face of itself. From this standpoint, spiritual growth is not approaching God but increasing sensitivity to this perpetual unfolding. The nearer you become, the more you recognize that nearness has always been complete. Neuroscience offers a striking analogy through neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to rewire its networks through experience. Just as neural connections strengthen through repeated awareness, spiritual consciousness expands through sustained recognition of the real's presence in all moments. Thus, divine nearness is not something achieved through effort, but revealed through awareness. The real does not approach, we awaken. The paradox is now clear. God is infinitely near, yet we often feel far away. The gap lies not in ontology, but in epistemology. not in what is, but in how we know. Ibn Arabi distinguishes between ontological unity, there is only the real, and experiential duality. The human feels separate. The latter arises because consciousness identifies with limited forms. The body, personality, and memory, instead of the infinite field sustaining them. He illustrates this through the metaphor of the ocean and the wave. The wave says, "I am separate," forgetting that its substance is water. The realization of oneness is not the annihilation of individuality, but the recognition of its source. This logic parallels phenomenology in Western philosophy, which argues that perception co-creates the experienced world. It also aligns with Advaita Vedanta's insight that Atman and Brahman are not two. Empirically, studies on ego dissolution show reduced activity in self-referential brain regions during mystical states, correlating with reports of unity and divine presence. Thus, Ibn Arabi's teaching is not abstract mysticism, it describes a real, observable shift in perceptual processing. Nearness is constant, only awareness fluctuates. How can this philosophical insight translate into lived experience? Awareness, practice, attention bias, reversal. Most human perception operates through a self-centered filter that scans for control, threat, or personal relevance. Mindful attention interrupts this habit, retraining the brain to register relational unity rather than separateness. From neuroscience, sustained attention engages the anterior insula, associated with empathy and interconnection. Ibn Arabi would say, "Turn the gaze of attention from the eye that looks to the act of looking itself. There you meet the real reframing distance as pedagogical illusion." Feelings of distance are not spiritual failure, but feedback. They reveal where perception remains veiled. Ibn Arabi writes, "The distance you perceive is God teaching you where to look." When you feel disconnected, the task is not to reach God, but to inquire, what assumption of separation am I still clinging to? Presence as cognitive skill. Presence is not an emotion, it is cognitive precision, the capacity to remain with experience as it unfolds. In Sufi practice muraqabah, watchful awareness, mirrors modern metacognitive training, observing thoughts without identification. Each moment of awareness polishes the mirror of consciousness, allowing divine reflection to appear.